In this video, I'm going to talk about 5 mental hurdles that we face as landscape photographers, which can really stop us improving and stop us taking better photographs. I'm also going to give some tips and ideas about how I approach these and overcome these hurdles in my own photography. So the first hurdle that I think we all face at some point as landscape photographers is something that I like to call simply not going out. Once we've got all the gear that we need to take good photographs, once we've got the skills and the knowledge of what needs to be done to take good photographs, all we need to do then is simply, perhaps with some planning, head out and take photographs, head out and practice. But I think at some point, across our career, if you want to call it that, as landscape photographers, something always can happen from time to time in our minds which stops us wanting to go out. Perhaps we may look outside and think the weather is not great. Perhaps we may think the light is not ideal. Perhaps we may think we're too tired or too busy. And often these may be genuine reasons, but at times I think as humans we try to find excuses to not go out. And this can be crazy because obviously we all do landscape photography because we love it in one way or another. So to think we don't want to go out is quite baffling, but I think it's something that definitely affects us all from time to time. How I get around this is that if it's weather related issues, I'll look out the window and I'll really ask myself genuinely, is it too bad for me to go out? Could I not do some scouting? Could I not work on some new techniques? Is there not something to actually gain by going out? Could I not go to a location where the weather conditions work? If I'm feeling tired or too busy, I'll simply look in the mirror and genuinely ask myself, to be honest, am I too tired to go out or am I genuinely too busy? And if the answer to these things are no, I'll always head out with my camera and I never regret it. There's always something new to learn or something new to discover about a location. Or perhaps you'll find a photograph that doesn't work on that day, but you can return to at a later point in time. And you'll always remember giving yourself that little nudge and heading out and what it helped you achieve. So the second mental hurdle that I like to talk about in this video, which I think can often face us, is something that I call the perfect composition. I think as landscape photographers, we're always seeking the perfect composition, but sometimes we need to acknowledge that a scene is beautiful, it's definitely worth taking, but there is perhaps not the perfect composition. Composition is hugely important in landscape photography. We should always do our best when we're out on location to get the composition as good as we can. We should always try and improve our skills at composition. But sometimes we need to accept the perfect composition doesn't exist. And I'd like to tell a brief story about this to help illustrate my point. Quite a few years ago now, I was out on a magical winter's morning and there was a scene which really caught my attention. I loved being there. I set up my composition and there was an object in that scene which I spotted and I didn't really like it. I wished it wasn't there. But I felt at that time, many years ago, I couldn't really do anything about it. So I took the image and at a later date I post-processed it and I was still very keen on the image. I loved the memories it evoked in me, but I just wasn't keen on this object in the image. So I used Photoshop to get rid of it. And I printed the image and I put it up on my wall and I would regularly pass and have a look at it and I would be fond of the image. But over time, I felt more emotionally detached from that image. And it was really just because I had such fond memories of taking it, but when I looked at it on the wall, I couldn't help but feel that's not what I saw on the day. I'd obviously removed something in Photoshop, so I was aware that a certain area of my image had some fake pixels, if you want to call it that, in it. And it just made me lose interest in the image. Now, I obviously edit my images and there's basically 2 schools of thoughts, I guess you could summarize in terms of editing images. Some people try and get as close to an exact replica of the scene as they can in editing. Other people are far more liberal with their editing. They can do huge amounts of editing. They may combine skies from different images and so on. It's simply down to the photographer what you like doing. There is no right or wrong. And it's really up to you as the individual, the choices you make. I just think it's important that you're honest what you do to your images. But I want to talk about how having a fix it and post mentality regarding things we don't like in our images can perhaps be harmful to our photography. And I think this can be described in two ways, really. The first is the way I've just described with my story. It is possible as a photographer, if you've fond memories of taking a scene but you heavily remove things from that scene at a later point, you may, as I felt with this image, become a bit more detached from it. I think little bits of object removal here and there is fine. Perhaps I was taking an image at the coast and I noticed way off in the coast someone had dropped an empty drinks can and I removed that. Things like that I'm quite comfortable with, but if it's part of an scene, an integral part of the scene, part of nature, I'm never really keen to remove things, but that's surely my own personal view. The second most important part of this is that I think it can harm our skills in the area of composition. So if we fall too much into this fix it and post mentality, seeking the perfect composition, I think we can become lazy photographers and our compositional skills suffer. So what I like to do to get round this is that if I notice something in a scene which I'm perhaps not happy with, it could be, say, a fence post, it could be a man-made building, or it could be trees, a tree branch creeping in from the sides of my frame. I try to really study it on location and I think, could I position it in a way which it actually enhances the composition? And if I can't do that, could I position it in a way that it's not distracting? And I think this helps us improve our skills as photographers and also eliminates the possibility that down the line we may lose our interest in the image because we've heavily removed things in Photoshop. So I'd like to take a look at a couple of images that I've captured recently where I dealt with these issues on location and talk about how I worked around them. And one is actually this image just behind me here. So the couple of images I'm going to take a look at are woodland images, and things creeping in from the edge of the frame can be a very common issue in woodland photography. But we need to realize that is part of being in a woodland. Often we're looking through trees, there's branches and so on get in the way. And I think it's important to try and notice these issues while on location and work them into our composition. So if we have a look at this image, the thing that I noticed while on location was this tree branch coming in from the extreme top left area of this image. And there was no way I could exclude it, and I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable removing it in Photoshop. And of course, we never want to be destroying branches on a location just to try and improve our photographs or get what we would class as the perfect composition. So what I did was just try and take great care, position it where I thought it would be best in the photograph. And I also noticed there was a similar branch to the right, so I thought they worked quite well together. And there was also some spiders' cobwebs on that branch to the top left, so I definitely wanted to include it. I felt I had to include it, otherwise the composition would suffer. So it was all really just about placing it in an area of the photograph where I felt it wasn't a distraction. There was some interest on it with the spider web, and as I say, we had that other branch to the right which complemented it. So this is another woodland image which you may have seen me capture in one of my recent videos. I really like this image as well. It brings back fantastic memories of being in the woodland on this foggy morning. It was quite a challenging composition to set up. We've got some leaves at the top left and top right. They are placed there intentionally. They add a little bit of depth and they are some nice framing as well. And I wanted to include these two slender trees to the right. I thought the composition worked much better when I included those. But when I set up my first draft of the composition, I couldn't help but notice some leaves coming in from the lower left of my framing. And these leaves were from trees similar to those slender ones on the right, but they were growing off to the left. So if I tried to go wider to include those, the composition suffered. I looked at going beyond them so I could exclude them from the shot, but that made the image worse in two ways. First of all, I could no longer include the two slender trees to the right, and also the second thing is that those branches coming out from the lower left of the tree became a little bit dominant and almost led your eye out of the image and off to the left of the frame. So I went back and revised my first draft of the composition ever so slightly, and what I tried to do is just position them in a way that without affecting the rest of the composition, they would slightly block part of those branches behind them, so they didn't lead your eye out of the frame. And I decided to just take the shot the way you can see it here. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that sometimes there isn't going to be the perfect composition initially, and to rely on a fix it in post mentality isn't necessarily good for our photography in the couple of ways that I've discussed. But if we can spot these potential issues on location, work them into our composition in a meaningful way, then we may leave that location feeling that we've captured what is to us, the photographer, the perfect composition. So the third mental hurdle that I think we face as landscape photographers is something that I call effort does not always equal reward. I think this is very true in landscape photography, and it's something that we definitely need to accept and deal with and work around. Otherwise, we could potentially lose our love for landscape photography, and we certainly don't want that to happen. So before I talk about that, I do want to talk about a situation in my photography where I do think effort definitely leads to reward. And that is where I find a scene when I'm out, but I know instantly it's not going to work on that day, but I can see great potential. I can visualize a fantastic image. So I will immediately start thinking when that scene is going to look its best. I might be looking and I may instinctively know it needs fog. I may think it needs some snow on the ground, or I may think it's going to look fantastic when there's some spring greens beginning to appear. Or I may think it works in autumn, or I may think, well, I need backlighting. Whatever it is, I've visualized a good image. And then the effort starts. There's planning, there's multiple return visits sometimes, and there's the patience of waiting months or perhaps a year or whatever until I get the final image that I've envisaged. So that's where effort does equal reward. But there's many times in landscape photography where huge amounts of effort, huge amounts of time, potentially a lot of money with traveling does not equal great reward. So an example of this, we may plan a fantastic trip. It involves a plane flight. It involves a lot of money, a lot of time, and we're going to locations, perhaps what you could call honeypot locations, where you think you're bound to get good photographs. You could go there, you may not connect with them, the weather may not be great, you may get poor light when you're there, and we can leave disappointed and we really feel we've made all that effort for no reward. The same can be with perhaps just traveling hundreds of miles in your car, hiking mountains or hills at sunrise, sunset, putting in huge amounts of physical effort, time, expensive travel as well, for your car, fuel, meals and so on. And you're exhausted, but you've left with no good photographs. And it's simply because maybe the weather forecast has been wrong or the lighting conditions weren't great. So all that effort and perhaps expense has led to no reward. So I think sometimes we need to just accept that as part and parcel of landscape photography, but there is also a number of ways that we can deal with this. One for me is to simply shoot more local. I can't overemphasize the benefits of this, not only for the environment and less footfall in all these honeypot locations, but for us as photographers, it's fantastic. Hopefully, within reasonable travel distance, we've all got access to locations which we can explore and experiment with and try and take some photographs. And it's just fantastic what you can achieve in your own local area. And if you don't get anything on that day, as I've spoke about earlier in this section, you can plan for a return visit, and it's much easier and cheaper to do, and there's less effort. So that is definitely one way to tackle the disappointment of putting huge amounts of effort into landscape photography but getting little reward. And another important thing to mention in this section, where I think we can put in great effort into getting a photograph, and it maybe gives us a false opinion of how good that photograph is, and that can be very damaging for our own photography. So for example, just say you spent a lot of money on a trip, you've traveled long distances, it's been tiring, you've hiked a mountain many times, and you've got this shot. Because you've put in so much time and effort, I think it's easy subconsciously to become emotionally attached to that image and think it's a good one, where perhaps it really isn't. You're almost subconsciously wanting or thinking it must be a good image because I've put in so much effort, but perhaps it isn't. So what I like to do, just to make sure that I'm not thinking the wrong idea about any of my images, is I just look at them. I totally distance myself from where I took them, the effort involved and so on. And I look at the image and I look at myself honestly and I say, if I took this image 5 minutes from my house with no expense and no effort, would I think this is one of my best images? Would I think it's a really good image? And that always helps me determine if the image stands alone as a good image, or if all the effort I've put in is falsely obscuring my views of it. So I hope these ideas help you in some way. So the fourth mental hurdle that I think we're all going to face as landscape photographers is dealing with summer. Summer definitely has a bad reputation, I think, in landscape photography. And I think it's undeservedly so. I think summer can be a fantastic time for capturing wonderful images. I think the issues that people encounter when doing landscape photography in summer are obviously the early sunrises, the late sunsets, the fact that the light can be a bit harsh through the day. Many people don't like the summer greens, and obviously there's the summer insects to deal with as well. So I'm going to try and keep walking here, but it's not really working. I'm afraid I'm not escaping these midges. I think as landscape photographers, we definitely all need to learn to embrace and love summer for our photography. There's definitely some fantastic images waiting to be captured. We don't need to travel long distances, but sometimes we need to put in a little bit more effort if we're wanting to capture those sunrises or sunsets in summer. Perhaps you've got some countryside that you can go to, or a reasonably local beach, anything like that. If you can make the effort just to maybe get up early once or twice every few weeks, make your way somewhere for sunrise. It's such a fantastic feeling to witness sunrise in a summer's morning, hear nature, and there should always be the opportunity, weather conditions permitting of course, to capture a beautiful image. Often people don't like woodland photography in summer. They don't like the green colours and so on, but I've been spending a lot of time in the woodland this summer just past, and I've captured some images that I'm really pleased with. I think autumn is obviously known as a great time for being in woodlands, depending on the woodland of course, but sometimes all that wonderful vivid autumn colour can be a bit overpowering and actually perhaps spoil a photograph and take the attention away from the composition itself. So I've learned to love some of the summer greens, and I've made a video about this recently covering some tips and ideas for how to get the most out of woodland photography in summer. So I'll put a link to that one in the description of the video if you want to take a look. Of course, in summer we can use our time wisely for scouting as well. I don't think we should class summer, as sometimes happens, as just the time of year to do scouting. We should definitely take photographs, but we can use it very wisely for scouting as we're taking photographs as well. Perhaps get a few ideas for autumn or even for spring next year, whatever it is. Summer is also a fantastic time of year to experiment, so perhaps you don't do a lot of black and white photography. So if the light is particularly harsh, perhaps give that a go. Try and get some high contrast images, see what you can do there. Perhaps experiment with intentional camera movement as well. But there is so much on offer in summer, so definitely don't let it get into our heads that we can't do landscape photography in summer, or that it's tremendously difficult, or indeed that we always need to be out in sunrise or sunset. We don't need to do that. I talked about in the Woodland video that I've just mentioned how I took those images in that video pretty much during the middle of the day or in the middle of the afternoon. So definitely don't dismiss summer. Don't get into the mindset where it's not a good time of year for photography, and hopefully you'll get some fantastic summer images. So the fifth and final mental hurdle that I think we face as landscape photographers is a condition that I feel we get into, or a state of mind that we get into, which I call, I must make the most of this. So I think as landscape photographers, it's fair to say that we witness the most amazing things when out in nature. We see beautiful sunrises, sunsets, we see fog-covered woodlands, we see cloud inversions, perhaps some mist lingering atop a river. We see the most beautiful things. And I think when we're on location witnessing these things, we can begin to panic a bit, and we really feel, I must make the most of this. You subconsciously feel you should be taking lots of wonderful photographs at that special moment in time. And I think that can be very harmful to our photography. We almost try to do so much. So I want to jump on location now, and I'll talk about this a bit more on one of those beautiful mornings. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing really well, and thank you for joining me in this video. So I'm out early today and I thought there'd be a chance of fog, and I've certainly got some of that. It's not thick in the immediate area, but off in the distance you should see some thick fog around the surrounding hillside here. And it really is a beautiful still morning, so I've been taking some shots of this lovely scene behind me. And I've just been trying to take my time and get the shots the way that I want them, because I think in conditions such as this, I think acceptance is a key word and something that's really important. So I think as photographers, we all get really excited by mornings such as this, some lovely scenery, some lovely conditions with the fog, and it's really tempting to try and get the absolute most out of it, rush around taking lots of photographs. And that will sometimes work, but I think more times than not it will actually lead to taking bad photographs and erring on the side of quantity over quality. So sometimes I think we all just need to accept things, slow down, go at the pace that we need to go, and just accept we're going to get the photographs that we're going to get. We can't really get more good photographs than we can possibly do in the time we've got. And I think that's really important to keep in mind with fog, because we're very aware fog can clear quickly, and we may rush around trying to get lots of photographs before it clears. So I think acceptance is a key word in photography, especially on days like this. hope you've enjoyed watching this video and found it interesting, and perhaps you yourself face some of these mental hurdles I've been talking about in this video. And if so, I hope you found my ideas and suggestions on how to deal with them helpful. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you soon in my next one.